Long before it was widely accepted that the Earth is round, in a time where a model of a flat Earth was popular and concerns existed that one could literally sail off the waters of the Earth, the Bible introduced an interesting notion. In Isaiah 40, verse 22, first part, we read, "It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers." Now, what is interesting about that is the notion of the circle of the earth, because when you go to the original text in Hebrew, it can actually be translated both as the circle of the earth, but also as the sphere of the earth. The language at the time did not have a modern notion or a way to describe a sphere other than describing a circle, or as we would say, an earth being round. Another interesting clue comes to us from Job 26, verse 7, where it reads, "He stretches out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing." In other words, we're floating in space. In Psalm 8, verse 8, we read, "The fowl of the air, and the fish of the sea, and whatsoever passes through the paths of the seas." And the paths of the seas is what's the interesting portion here. Up until the 1800s, we did not know about ocean paths and its currents in the scientific world, and yet this passage was written by King David about 3,000 years ago. Now Matthew, an officer of the United States Navy who read this psalm, was inspired by it and went to look for these paths and then discovered them. Another interesting phenomenon is atmospheric circulation. The sun warms the air the warmest around the equator. Air rises and moves away from the equator, cools off, then drops down to the surface, moving back to the equator, causing a circulation or circuit. This describes what is called the Hadley cell. Similar effects exist around the poles, where cold air drops at the poles, moves away from the poles, warms up, rises, and then returns to the poles to then drop again. This is called the polar cell. Then Farrell discovered a ball-bearing effect between the Hadley and the polar cells. Now, these theories started in the 1700s, have been perfected up until the 1900s, and then been confirmed through satellite images. What's interesting is that in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 6, we read, "The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits." What's interesting is that we didn't discover these circuits until 17 through 1900s. In Ecclesiastes 1 verse 7 we read, "All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again." Then in Job 36 verse 27 and 28 we read, "For he maketh small the drops of water, they pour down rain according to the vapor thereof, which the clouds do drop and distill upon men abundantly." Now in Ecclesiastes, the Bible clearly indicates that there is a cycle where water from the sea gets back into the rivers, and the rivers run back into the sea, yet the sea is never full. And then in Job 36, we're given more detail about water vapor, clouds, and rainfall. The Bible does not fully describe all there is to know about the water cycle, but all its statements regarding the water cycle are scientifically accurate. The discovery of ocean floor springs represents a great milestone in the scientific investigation of the Earth. Before 1930, very little was known about the ocean floor. Volcanoes were observed to break the sea surface, and this provided evidence of undersea volcanoes. Because modern volcanoes on land emit steam, scientists did suggest that water might be coming out of volcanoes on the ocean floor. In the 70s, ocean floor springs were discovered and photographed in 1977 using a 23-foot-long submersible that could withstand the 3 tons per square inch pressure at the ocean floor. Now, the Bible makes reference to these springs on the ocean floor. In Job 38, verse 16, we read, "Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth?" In Genesis 7, verse 11, we read, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened." In Genesis 8, verse 2, we read, "The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained." And in Proverbs 8, verse 28, we read, "When he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep." So now I want to go back to our original question, the Bible. Is it a bunch of old scrolls with some text where tons of concepts went lost in translation over the years, or is it a source that we should consider for our modern science?